War movies have been a major feature of cinema since the beginning, from Russia to China. The screenwriter and scholar Eric R. Williams actually identified war films as one of the 11 supergenres which he claimed that all feature-length narrative films can be classified by. The other 10 supergenres, by the way, are action, crime, fantasy, horror, romance, science fiction, slice of life, sports, thriller, and western. A few films have focused on wars featuring ancient civilizations like the Greeks and Egyptians, but the majority of war movies revolve around more recent events. This seems to be at least partly because realism has been a primary focus in these films ever since they first started appearing in movie theaters, perhaps most noticeably in Russian and Chinese, as well as American cinema. War movies have consistently pushed the capacity of film to communicate to an audience, whether it's the potentially lifelong mental and emotional effects of war, addressed unflinchingly in films going as far back as 1941's Sergeant York, or the chaos and mindless violence of battle, like the brilliant depiction of D-Day by Steven Spielberg in his 1998 classic Saving Private Ryan. Today, we're going to talk about the top 10 most realistic war movies according to military veterans, and look at the reasons why some films feel more realistic than others. Make sure you stay until number 1, as we really have to fight for our pick for the most realistic war movie according to military veterans. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Trendcraze, the go-to destination for binge watchers and TV junkies. Make sure to subscribe for our weekly videos where we cover the hidden world of your favorite movies and TV series. Without further ado, let's get started. Number 10, A Bridge Too Far. This film was directed by the legendary Richard Attenborough, who sustained permanent ear damage as a sergeant flying in the RAF film production unit and went on to work as an acclaimed actor, producer, and director who remained highly acclaimed throughout his entire career from the 1940s to his last film in 2007. He was even more admirable in her personal endeavors, dedicating much of his life to the fight against the muscle-wasting condition muscular dystrophy and global education, which does not judge based on color, race, creed, or religion. Plus, his brother is basically the voice of nature, David Attenborough. There is no doubt that Attenborough's wartime experiences left a huge, lasting impact on his worldview, and he definitely assembled an all-star, transatlantic cast when he got to make his war picture. The list of actors still resonates even over 40 years on. Names like Sean Connery, Anthony Hopkins, Robert Redford, Gene Hackman, Michael Caine, James Caan, and Laurence Olivier. The screenplay was also adapted by William Goldman, one of the most influential writers of his era, winning Academy Awards for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men, as well as the cult classic fantasy comedy The Princess Bride. By the way, Goldman's memoir, Adventures in the Screen Trade, is essential reading for anyone with dreams of making it as a screenwriter. The film tells the story of an Allied plot during 1944 to drop paratroopers into occupied Netherlands to seize bridges behind enemy lines, blazing a trail for a full invasion to follow. This was a real operation codenamed Market Garden, and real veterans from the mission were heavily involved during the making of the film, namely Dick Bogart and John Addison from the British XXX Corps. In fact, if anything, this film is criticized for its faithfulness to the events, as it was thought to be slightly low on entertainment by not embellishing the story at all. Number 9, The Hurt Locker. The Hurt Locker came out in 2008 to near universal approval, often noting in particular Catherine Bigelow's directing, Jeremy Renner's acting, and the portrayal of the psychological impact of combat on the Central Iraq War Explosive Ordnance Disposal Team. The film remains the only Best Picture Oscar winner to be directed by a woman and was selected by the Library of Congress in 2020 to be preserved in the National Film Registry as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Now, the reason the film is only number 9 is because it actually received quite a lot of criticism from veterans for some inaccuracies, such as uniforms, the lack of radio communication, and some of the combat decisions. Specifically, for example, the order to split up when leaving the scene of an explosion to cover more ground. However, the film was still credited with representing the tension and atmosphere of war in Iraq and the effects on the men stationed there. Number 8, Black Hawk Down. This movie was directed by another legend, Ridley Scott, and was based on a best-selling book of the true story of 100 Army Rangers who were dropped into Mogadishu, Somalia in 1993 when things went south fast. The film lifted the curtain on the black ops happening behind the scenes through the secretive Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. The movie does not look much at the bigger picture or context of the battle so much as propel the viewer into a harrowing, moment-to-moment experience as it would have felt like on the ground at the time. The stacked cast give their all to pay tribute to the men who fought on that day. Number 7. Jarhead. This movie was based on a book written by former Marine Anthony Swofford, the main character being played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who was deployed in the Gulf War while in a complex internal crisis, partly driven from thinking his girlfriend might have been cheating while he was on the front lines. Jarhead does an almost unparalleled job of capturing the range of emotions and issues during life at war, from boredom and homesickness to paranoia and frustration. The cinematography and long camera shots on the barren but constantly dangerous landscape also build the atmosphere of tension. Gyllenhaal offered a special intensity in that lead role, and Jamie Foxx and Chris Cooper were also widely well received by the military viewers. The aspect of camaraderie and brotherhood between soldiers was also demonstrated well by the film, although a scene where they were shooting in the air and dancing around a bonfire was noticeably more like a college fraternity house than a disciplined Marine unit, according to Paul Geithner, who served for 26 years before retiring in 1993 as a lieutenant colonel in the reserves. While it focuses on a lesser-known war and less in the way of large-scale action sequences, it is certainly a film respected by veterans for its attention on the world of warfare, which is off the battleground. Number 6. Platoon. Platoon was directed by Vietnam War veteran Oliver Stone, a man who is definitely worth some time on YouTube if you want to hear intelligent and well-thought-out views on that highly controversial subject. A younger person might think Charlie Sheen being the lead already invalidated the possibility of this film being any good, but bear in mind that this was 1986, and the cast also included highly respected actors like Forrest Whitaker and Willem Dafoe. Stone had been writing this screenplay over the years since his return from Vietnam in 1968 and did not set the movie around specific events, aiming to capture the wider context and mindsets of American soldiers in that deeply confusing and disconcerting war. According to fellow Vietnam veteran and memoirist Jim Beaver, Platoon is the greatest and most important film about the Vietnam War to date. As far as I can tell, Stone got everything right, said Beaver. The opening scene of fresh meat coming off the plane while old meat is laid out on the tarmac for shipment home was more dramatic than my own arrival in Vietnam, but it expressed a fear that gripped all of us, I think, at the beginnings of our first tours. Number 5. Das Boot. This is the first foreign film on our list, a 1981 German film set in 1942, although we have to acknowledge the best Russian war movies could be an entire top 10 of its own. This is perhaps the best in a very claustrophobic and effective subcategory of war movies, the submarine film. It follows a crew of a German U-boat fighting in the Battle of the Atlantic against the British, struggling to perform challenging missions while simultaneously struggling with the question of their government's motivations. It was actually very ahead of its time in the form of a long-form TV series, but is more often consumed as a 3-hour movie. The viewer is taken along with the fear, pressure, and comradeship that comes from being trapped in a metal box with no moment to feel safe. Number 4. Full Metal Jacket. Maybe the most influential director of all time, Stanley Kubrick's infamous precision and creativity with cinema may not have seemed best suited to the cramped barracks of the Marines' Paris Island training facility. Actor and Marine with extensive drill instructor experience R. Lee Ermey was brought on as a technical advisor and put together an instructional tape where he went on an extended tirade at several extras. Kubrick had promised the role to an actor named Tim Colseri, but had no doubt in replacing him with Ermey, and actually allowed him to write or edit his own dialogue and improvise on the set, very rare on a Kubrick film. Even rarer was Kubrick's own admission that Ermey often needed only 2 or 3 takes per scene, when Kubrick was famous for usually wanting the exact opposite from his actors. The second half sends the soldiers through the Tet Offensive, and historical experts have since recognized he almost perfectly captured the tactics and politics underlying the Viet Cong machine. Kubrick said before the film that he had no interest in making any moral determinations about war. He just wanted to portray it accurately. Few have ever argued that he failed. Number 3. Saving Private Ryan. Now, this might be a controversial pick for some people, as many of the battles and characters never existed, even the mission itself and Hanks and Damon's central roles. However, from a visual perspective, Spielberg and his team considered every detail with care and precision, such as the soldiers' gear and even their tactics in battle. This film simply had to be in the top 3 purely as a result of the one scene that we all first remember when we hear the title. The storming of Omaha Beach on D-Day might be the single most powerful and effective battle scene ever, resulting in some World War II veterans needing to be escorted from movie theaters after seeing the footage and clever mix of camera work and direction to encapsulate the chaos and violence of that fateful day. Number 2. Apocalypse Now. This might be more of a surreal and unusual film than you would expect to place this highly on a scale for realism, but anyone who knows anything on the challenges behind the scenes of this multi-year, cursed production, brilliantly captured in the documentary Heart of Darkness, will appreciate that the making of this film was a war in itself. Every war film since has been deeply indebted to this film, from the dramatic, classical score interspersed with whirring, thudding helicopter blades and massive explosions between the long, foreboding periods of quiet suspense. Martin Sheen's opening scene in a Saigon hotel room paints a picture that 1,000 words could not, and Brando's performance still holds a terrifying grasp over the viewer, many of whom would have no idea that the dark close-ups and chilling cinematography was basically set up to hide Brando's extra weight on arrival to the set. The film is also not lacking for action, with the beach attack with Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore perhaps just coming in second in terms of best battle scenes to Saving Private Ryan's Omaha Beach. We see helicopters flying and shooting, soldiers fighting, music soars, and the Americans take ground and immediately let the audience into their ulterior motive, surfing. To quote Kilgore, "Charlie don't surf." This film was nominated for 8 Oscars, despite initially receiving mixed reviews, and even won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, a rarity for an American war film such as this. It was also selected for preservation by the Library of Congress in 2000, and the greatest film critic of all time, Roger Ebert, included it in his top 10 films ever. What more needs to be said? And number 1, Dunkirk. This is the most recent film on the list, and some people may not be happy at its pole position. However, we really believe that this film is only going to gain in acclaim as the years pass from its 2018 release. While many found it difficult to follow, to quote U.S. Marine Tan Vega, it succeeds in recreating the plight of tending to your fellow soldier while being under constant threat of bombardment. Every element of cinema is utilized to its full potential, from the understated performances of the cast to the use of tight angles and close-ups to disorientate and panic the audience, dragging us into the mindset of the participants and appreciating the trust and relationships that must immediately form in the stress of war. Especially in Britain, we all think we know the story of Dunkirk and the bravery exhibited by all kinds of people on that day. But this movie does an unparalleled job of chucking you into the confusion you saw, with civilians involved and much less technology available than the wars that have followed. If we look at the progression of the war movie, we can see a trend away from trying to replicate the events to instead providing the audience with an experience taking advantage of all the facets of cinema, from cinematography to sound mixing to set design. That's why we think Dunkirk comes out on top, but we'd love to hear what you guys think too. While you're here, go ahead and click one of these 2 videos on your screen. See you there.